I always believed the worst betrayals came with shouting, slammed doors, or bitter arguments, but mine arrived quietly, through a phone call that never fully disconnected. It was late afternoon, the kind of calm stretch of day where everything feels soft and harmless. The kettle hummed on the stove, the scent of chamomile filled the air, and sunlight pooled on my kitchen tiles like warm honey. I had just spoken to my son, Greg, helping him finalize a few simple documents he said were urgent. He'd asked me to stay on the line while he talked to the lender, claiming they needed a quick verification. I didn't think twice. I never did when it came to my son. But after the line went silent, the call didn't end. I heard a chuckle, Greg's. Then Jenna's voice floated in, sweet but sharpened into something cruel. "She really didn't catch on," Jenna said, laughing softly. "She thinks she's helping us." Greg snorted. "She doesn't think. She just signs. Makes everything easier." Their laughter wasn't loud. It wasn't harsh. But it hit me harder than any scream could have. I froze at my kitchen table, the spoon slipping from my fingers and tapping against my teacup. The world around me suddenly felt unfamiliar. The floral curtains I had sewn myself, the little ticking clock Robert bought before he passed, even the chair beneath me felt like it belonged to someone else now. I leaned closer to the phone, hardly breathing. "Just keep acting grateful," Greg continued. "As long as she keeps covering the payments, we're set. She won't realize what's actually happening." My stomach tightened. Jenna added, "We should have done this sooner. She practically handed everything over." A faint ringing filled my ears. My heart moved too slowly, as though it needed permission to beat. My son's voice, my only child's voice, sliced through every memory I treasured. This was the boy I raised through widowhood, the man I supported through every crisis, the father of my grandson, and he called me clueless, convenient, useful. I didn't hang up right away. For the first time in my life, I listened without being invited to speak. When I finally pressed the disconnect button, my hand was trembling. The kettle whistled behind me like it was screaming for me. I turned it off mechanically and righted my teacup, watching the small puddles soak into the woven rug I had made decades ago. My kitchen smelled the same, the light still fell the same, but nothing felt the same. Just hours earlier, I had been at the bank paying off the last of Greg and Jenna's mortgage, my final gift to them. My husband's life insurance, my carefully saved investments, years of sacrifice poured into their future. I imagined their gratitude, their joy, their stability. I never imagined their mockery. I sank into the nearest chair, clutching the phone, and whispered to myself, "What have I done?" Not in self-pity, not even in regret, but in dawning clarity. I hadn't just helped them buy a home. I had handed them access, authority, leverage, and they had weaponized every bit of it. A cold calm began to settle in my chest. Not rage, not sorrow, something tighter, more focused, a quiet awakening. I was done being blind. I stood, wiped the counter clean, and drew a long, steady breath. "Not anymore," I murmured, and for the first time in a very long time, I meant it. But I still had no idea how deep the deception truly went until I opened the first hidden folder and discovered my name attached to accounts I never even knew existed. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't cry either. Tears would have made it feel personal, emotional, fragile. But what I felt wasn't fragile anymore. It was sharp, like something inside me had finally snapped into place. By dawn, I was seated at my small desk with my laptop open, a fresh cup of bitter black tea beside me. I stared at the login page Greg and Jenna had helped me set up months ago, just to make everything easier for you, Mom. Easier. That word meant something different now. With a steady hand, I typed my password and entered the cloud folder they'd created for me. I had only opened it once before, letting Greg scroll through it while I watched blindly. But today, I opened every file myself. At first, everything looked harmless. Mortgage receipts, tax documents, copies of loan statements, things I recognized. But then came the folders I didn't recognize. One was labeled Joint Business Agreement, MA&GA. My initials, next to Greg's. I clicked it, and my breath stilled. There were contracts, pages and pages of them, where my name was listed as primary guarantor, co-owner, financial backer, and in one case, sole responsible party. I didn't remember signing any of this, but I recognized my signature. Greg had always insisted on handling paperwork for me. Had he copied my signature? Had he used the power of attorney documents I trusted him with? My eyes moved down the page. The numbers didn't make sense. The amounts were enormous, loans and investments I had never heard of. Some were labeled high risk. Some showed losses. Some were already overdue. My heartbeat didn't speed up, but my hands grew cold. This was no misunderstanding, no misplaced trust. This was deliberate. I clicked into another folder. This one contained brokerage accounts with my name on them. 3 separate accounts, all active. I didn't even know I had a brokerage account. The transaction history made my stomach twist. Thousands of dollars moved in and out. Crypto purchases, risky trades, transfers directly to Greg's personal accounts. They had built an entire financial structure with me as the foundation and a trap beneath it. If anything collapsed, and much of it already looked unstable, I would be the one buried under the weight. Not Greg, not Jenna, me. My throat tightened, but no tears came. No panic, either. Only the growing realization that this wasn't just betrayal. It was exploitation. I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. My legs carried me to the kitchen where I braced myself against the counter. The house hummed softly around me, the refrigerator buzzing, the wind brushing against the windows, but it all sounded distant. I repeated the same quiet question over and over. How long has this been happening? I thought back. The little favors, the requests, the warm smiles, the insistence that we're a team, Mom, all the clues I had brushed aside. I returned to the desk and opened a new notebook and began writing a list. Every loan I remembered, every paper I signed, every time Greg insisted on helping. The list grew quickly, filling the page long before the situation felt clear. I took a deep breath and opened the last folder, the one labeled Active Accounts Managed Access. My name was on every document, not with pride, but with possession. Their possession. I closed the laptop with a quiet click. They had built a world where I was the foundation and the shield and the fallback plan. But they forgot one thing. Foundations can crack, and shields can turn. I stood up straighter than I had in years. If they thought I was too naive to understand what they were doing, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Because the next morning, I walked into my financial advisor's office, and what he revealed made everything I'd discovered look small. By morning, my decision was already made. I didn't eat breakfast. I didn't even bother brushing crumbs off the kitchen counter where I laid out my notes the night before. I simply dressed, tied my hair back, and picked up the folder I had prepared. Every suspicious document I had printed, every list of questions I had written. This time, I wasn't going to let anyone speak for me, not even my son. The streets were quiet as I drove toward downtown, the early sun still fighting its way through the gray morning haze. My hands were steady on the wheel, steadier than they had been in months. When I reached the office building, I hesitated only long enough to take a breath, then stepped inside. "Good morning, Mrs. Adams," the receptionist greeted warmly. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said with a polite smile, "but I'd appreciate a moment with Mr. Carlton. It's urgent." She must have heard something in my voice because she didn't ask questions. Within minutes, she ushered me into the advisor's office. Mr. Carlton stood from his desk as I walked in, his expression softening with recognition. "Martha." "This is a surprise. Are you all right?" I closed the door behind me. "No," I said calmly, "but I'm here to fix that." His brows drew together as I sat down and placed the folder on his desk. For a long moment, I simply watched his face as he opened it and scanned the first few documents. The color drained from his expression almost immediately. "Martha, where did you get these?" "My son and his wife created some cloud accounts for me months ago, encouraged me not to worry about the details. Last night, I finally reviewed them." He flipped through the pages again, this time more carefully. "You're listed here as primary guarantor. And on this one, and this one, these are extremely high liability positions. I never approved them, at least not knowingly." Mr. Carlton pressed his lips together. "And these signatures?" "They're mine. I admit it. But I don't remember signing most of these documents." His eyes softened with something between concern and anger. "Martha, these contracts give your son unrestricted access to your credit, your assets, and your portfolio. Some of these accounts carry enormous risk. If they default, I lose everything." I finished the sentence for him. He nodded grimly. But I didn't flinch. I'd already accepted that truth. "What can I do?" I asked, leaning forward. "Tell me every legal step. I want everything reversed, frozen, reviewed, whatever it takes. And I don't want Greg notified. Not yet." Something flickered across his face. Respect, maybe. He cleared his throat. "All right. First, we revoke all power of attorney permissions today. Then, we freeze all joint financial activity. Next, we file for immediate review of the accounts your name is tied to." He paused. "But Martha, once this begins, there's no going back." "Good," I thought. "Start the process." For the next hour, we worked through each file systematically. He asked questions, I answered with clarity I didn't know I had. And as each form printed and each signature dried, something remarkable happened. The fear began to fade, and in its place, something new began to grow: control. When the last document was filed, Mr. Carlton folded his hands on his desk. He said, "There's one more thing. If your son continues using your name, or if any damage is already done, you may need legal counsel." I nodded. "I'll make the call today." He walked me to the door, his voice softer now. "I'm proud of you for coming in." I wasn't proud yet, but I was awake. As I stepped into the sunlight outside, I felt the weight shift inside me. Not lighter, just clearer. This wasn't over. Greg called just after sunset. My kitchen was dim except for the warm glow of the corner lamp. I had just finished organizing the last batch of documents in a neat stack on the table. The house felt still, anticipatory almost, as though it sensed the shift inside me. When his name lit up my phone, I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, sweetheart," I said gently, keeping my voice soft, familiar. "Hey, Mom." His tone was cheerful, too cheerful. It was the voice he used when he was trying to sound relaxed, the kind that used to comfort me. But now, I heard the calculation underneath it. "How was your day?" he asked. "Oh, the usual. Ran some errands, organized a few things around the house." There was a pause, barely a second, but I could hear him recalculating behind the silence. Then he dove into small talk, meaningless chatter about the baby, the weather, a new restaurant he and Jenna wanted to try, all the warm-up strokes he used before lowering the hook. Then his tone shifted ever so slightly. "Actually, Mom, there's something I wanted to talk to you about." There it was. I leaned back in my chair, letting him continue. "You remember that business opportunity I told you about, right? The one I've been preparing for forever?" "Mm-hmm," I hummed, calm. "The one you said was life-changing, yes?" He chuckled. "Yeah, that one. They just fast-tracked the investment stage. It's a huge deal, Mom, massive, but they need liquidity fast." I said nothing. I wanted him to say it all. "So," he continued, "since we're already on the paperwork together, it would be simple to move a little money around. Really small. Just temporary." I could practically hear his smile through the phone. "How small is small, Greg?" He cleared his throat, his tell. "It's just 200,000. Short term, totally covered by our combined assets." Our combined assets. The words tasted foul, even from his lips. "And you already prepared the paperwork?" I asked. "Yeah," he said quickly. "Just to save time. You know how slow these lenders can be. I figure once you're comfortable, it's better to have the forms ready." Forms he assumed I'd sign without looking. Forms he assumed I'd approve with blind trust. Just like always. I let silence stretch for a moment. Not long enough to raise suspicion, but long enough for him to start mentally pushing. "Mom?" His tone tightened. "You there?" "I'm here," I said sweetly. "And of course we should talk about it. Why don't we meet tomorrow, face to face?" "Sure," he said quickly. Too quickly. "In public," I added lightly. "Somewhere quiet. Easier for me to focus." Another micropause. He hated public places when discussing money. But he couldn't refuse, not without revealing something. Yeah, of course," he said. "Whatever makes you comfortable." After we ended the call, I didn't feel shaken, or angry, or heartbroken. I felt certain. He still believed I was the same mother who trusted every word he said. He still believed he had me wrapped neatly in the same old loops of guilt and affection. He had no idea that while he was rehearsing his pitch, I was preparing something far sharper. I gathered the documents from the table, placed them gently inside my bag, and locked the front door. Tomorrow, Greg would discover a version of me he never imagined existed. The cafe smelled of roasted coffee beans and vanilla syrup. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows, bouncing off the polished wood and soft leather seats. I arrived early, slipping into a quiet corner booth with a clear view of the entrance. My bag was beside me, heavier than usual, not with papers, but with preparation. The recorder was nestled discreetly inside, ready to capture every word Greg thought he could charm his way through. He arrived 5 minutes later, too energetic, too confident. His smile stretched across the room, perfectly timed for anyone watching, but not for me. I had no intention of being anyone's audience today. "Morning, Mom," he said, sliding into the booth, still projecting warmth. "Morning," I replied, voice calm, steady. "How are you?" "I'm good, really good." His eyes darted around, but he didn't notice the recorder. He never did. Not fully. We ordered coffee. He insisted on paying, naturally, as if generosity could disguise the pitch he was about to deliver. After a few minutes of small talk, comments about the weather, our mutual acquaintances, the baby's latest antics, I leaned forward slightly. "Greg, let's get to it, shall we?" He straightened, a flash of pride in his posture. "Of course. I'm glad you're open to this." And then he began weaving his story with practiced precision. The business deal, the urgency, the short-term liquidity, the safe nature of the paperwork. Each phrase was designed to sound reasonable, inevitable, even exciting. He spoke fast, smooth, confident. Too confident. I let him run through it, letting every word sink in and every lie register. The recorder was hidden under the table, its microphone catching his tone, the subtle pauses, the overemphasized assurances. Every promise he framed, every reassurance he offered became a permanent record. He didn't notice when I subtly tapped my pen against the table, signaling my awareness, or when I leaned back slightly, watching him sweat a little under his own performance. By the time he finished, he was waiting for my reaction, expecting admiration, trust, perhaps even compliance. Instead, I smiled softly. "Thank you, Greg. That's very thorough." He leaned in, a little too eagerly. "So you'll—" I shook my head gently. "Not today, but I do appreciate how much thought you put into it." A flash of confusion passed over his face. He tried to mask it, but the subtle twitch around his eyes betrayed him. "Mom, I thought—" "I know exactly what you thought. But things have changed. I've changed." He blinked. His practiced charm faltered. "You see, I've been preparing too. I've gathered the facts, reviewed the forms, and recorded this entire conversation." His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "Recorded what?" "Every single word," I said softly, leaning back, letting the words sink in. "Every promise, every exaggeration, every manipulation, it's all here, Greg. Safe, undeniable." For a moment he looked like the child he used to be, the one who tried to smooth over mistakes with a smile. Then he remembered. I wasn't that mother anymore. I sipped my coffee, calm, unshaken. "So, before you ask anything else, think carefully. Because the version of me sitting across from you today isn't the same one you've been rehearsing for your entire life." Greg's eyes narrowed, the first hint of panic threading through his otherwise composed face. The game had shifted. The hunter had become the hunted, and he would never see it coming again. Rehook. Because this was just the beginning. Tomorrow, the documents would move, the truth would surface, and Greg would finally face consequences he had spent years avoiding. If you want, I can also draft Part 6, where the confrontation escalates into action, showing Greg's full reaction and the fallout from your recorded evidence, keeping it cinematic and suspenseful for your script series. The following morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The air felt heavy with expectation, a quiet tension that only grows when someone underestimates you. My bag was lighter this time, just the documents, copies of the forms, and my phone ready to act as a fail-safe. Greg walked in 10 minutes later, perfectly timed, as if he had rehearsed every step. His usual confident smile was in place, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. I noticed it immediately. "Morning, Mom," he said, voice overly bright, trying to reclaim control. "Morning, Greg," I replied, calm. "I hope you slept well." Yes, I did," he said, settling into the chair across from me. His hands tapped nervously against the desk, a tiny tell he couldn't hide. I didn't waste words. I slid the first folder across the desk, letting it land with a soft thud. The papers inside were meticulously organized, each one labeled, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. "Here are the documents you prepared," I said slowly, deliberately. "I've reviewed everything, and I've also made some copies, just to be safe." He glanced down, a flash of recognition crossing his face. "Oh, you've read them." "I have," I said evenly, every detail. And I've been thinking, if this deal is as urgent as you claimed, we need to clarify a few things first. Greg shifted in his seat. He tried to mask his impatience, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. "And exactly what do you mean by that?" he asked, voice tighter now. I leaned forward, lowering my voice just slightly. "Transparency, Greg. Every promise, every assurance you made last night, it's all recorded." His eyes widened. "Recorded?" "Yes, every word," I said. I placed my phone on the table, screen facing him, the subtle blinking light making the point unmistakable. "This isn't about trust anymore. It's about facts. And your facts?" I let the pause hang in the air. "Don't hold up." His confident facade began to crumble. He opened his mouth, searching for some smooth excuse, some charm to untangle himself from the trap, but no words came. "You see, Greg, this was never about money or speed. It was about awareness. And now you're fully aware that I won't be played anymore." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Words had failed him, and for the first time in years, he was exposed. The office was quiet except for the soft ticking of the wall clock. Every second emphasized the shift. The tables had turned, and Greg knew it. Because by the time the week ended, the consequences of this meeting would ripple far beyond our small circle, and Greg would finally understand the cost of underestimating me. By midweek, the ripples of that cafe meeting had grown into waves. The office was no longer the quiet, controlled space Greg relied on. Word had spread. Subtle, careful, yet impossible to ignore. His colleagues, once loyal to his charm and supposed expertise, now glanced at him with a new awareness, a quiet skepticism that gnawed at his confidence. I arrived at the office early, as always. The day was crisp, the sunlight cutting sharp angles through the blinds. I felt no fear, no hesitation, only a steady, quiet satisfaction. The plan had been set into motion, and now I watched it unfold. Greg appeared shortly after, late for the first time in months. His steps were hurried, a faint tremor in his movements. I noticed the way he avoided my gaze as he passed my desk. He tried to appear casual, but it was a brittle, fragile performance. "Mom," he said, finally, voice tight, almost too low to carry across the room. "Greg," I replied calmly, eyes on my screen. "Good morning." He shifted from foot to foot, glancing around. The recording, the documents, the quiet but deliberate dissemination of facts, they had set a trap he hadn't fully considered. He started, then faltered. "You don't need to speak," I said smoothly, without looking up. "Actions speak louder than words, and your actions have already been cataloged." I had sent copies of the documents to the appropriate people, legal, financial, and administrative teams who had authority to act. Every word, every misrepresentation, every misleading promise was now undeniable. I had prepared for this moment meticulously. He swallowed hard, the first hint of real panic breaking through his practiced calm. "Mom, wait, this isn't what it looks like. I finally turned, letting my eyes meet his. "Greg, it is exactly what it looks like. You assumed I would be easy to manipulate. You assumed the old patterns still applied, but you miscalculated." The office was quiet, the tension thick enough to taste. Even the hum of computers seemed distant, irrelevant. All that mattered was the confrontation, the reckoning. He tried one last gambit, a mix of charm and pleading, but it landed flat. Every smile, every excuse, every soft tone, obsolete, gone. He had no leverage, no allies, no safety net. "I've been preparing for this," I continued, voice steady, "not just for myself, but for anyone who might have been affected by your schemes. This ends now. Greg, you don't get to dictate the story anymore." His face paled. The confidence he carried for years was gone, replaced with something raw, exposed, fear. He realized fully that the game had shifted irrevocably. The hunter had become the hunted, and there was no escape this time. "You should have considered the consequences," I added softly, letting the words hang in the air like a verdict. "You gambled on my trust, and now that trust is gone. Permanently." Greg's jaw tightened, and for a moment I almost pitied him. Almost. But I didn't. Every lie he told, every attempt to manipulate me, had led to this reckoning. The office clock ticked steadily, each second a reminder that control had shifted, and I was firmly in charge. Rehook, because by the end of this week, Greg would be forced to face the full impact of his actions, and the world he thought he controlled would crumble piece by piece before his eyes. By Friday, the atmosphere around Greg had shifted completely. Whispers followed him down hallways. Meetings that were once routine now carried tension, subtle but palpable. The colleagues who had once hung on his every word now watched with measured skepticism. The confidence he had carried like armor for years was gone, replaced by uncertainty, by fear he could no longer hide. I arrived at the office that morning, calm and collected, as if nothing could touch me. My bag was light, just the final set of documents and the recorder, now a silent symbol of the week's upheaval. Greg entered a few minutes later, his usual swagger replaced by cautious steps. He avoided my eyes, as if acknowledging my presence could somehow reignite the storm he had long underestimated. "Mom," he said, his voice tight, brittle, almost pleading. "Greg," I replied evenly, meeting his gaze without a flicker of hesitation. "Good morning." There was no warmth in my tone, no softness to buffer the truth he had spent years avoiding. This was accountability, pure and unfiltered. You've done a lot of work," he started, fumbling with the edge of his sleeve. "But maybe we can sort this out?" I shook my head. "No, Greg, this isn't about negotiation. It's about consequences." I slid the final folder across the desk. It contained everything: copies of the misrepresented documents, correspondence, and the recordings that captured every lie. Each piece was labeled, cross-referenced, and backed by undeniable proof. He swallowed, eyes darting between the folder and me, realizing finally the magnitude of what had been set in motion. Every scheme, every attempt to manipulate had been documented. Every word he thought could charm or guilt me was now evidence. "You assumed I was the same mother who would trust blindly," I said softly, leaning back. "But that version of me doesn't exist anymore. The moment you tried to manipulate me, you set the stage for this. Every step, every lie, every single assumption has led here." Greg's jaw tightened. His mind raced, searching for an escape, for some loophole, but there was none. The office felt impossibly still, every tick of the clock emphasizing his vulnerability. "You should have considered the consequences before you acted," I said, calm but cutting. "Trust isn't given, it's earned, and you've lost it irrevocably." He exhaled sharply, the tension in his shoulders collapsing. He understood, finally, that charm, persuasion, and smooth words could no longer shield him. The rules had changed. I held the power now, and he was fully exposed. For the first time, he was seeing the full scope of his actions reflected back at him. The people he had tried to manipulate, the trust he had broken, and the version of me he could no longer control. I collected the folder and slid it into my bag. The recorder was silent but potent, a reminder that this week's events were indelibly etched in history. "You gambled on my complacency," I said softly, standing. You lost, and now you'll face the full consequences of every move you made. That world you thought you controlled, it's gone. He said nothing. There were no excuses left, no charm to recover, just silence, heavy and absolute. As I walked away, I felt the weight lift, the certainty that control had returned to where it belonged. Greg would have to rebuild his life without manipulation, without lies, without the false safety he had once relied on. And for me, the truth was liberating. I wasn't just reclaiming my power, I was reshaping the story, ensuring the consequences were real, undeniable, and inescapable. The office doors closed behind me. The world outside carried on, but inside, the reckoning had already been written, and Greg would never forget it.